Welcome back to the report. Now, Shaykh Suliman Ghani, a prominent figure and activist in the Muslim community, was branded a supporter of the Islamic State group in Syria and Iraq in Prime Minister's Question Time yesterday. In an attack on the Labour mayoral candidate, Sadiq Khan, David Cameron said he questioned the Tooting MP's judgement after sharing a platform with the Imam 9 times. Our UK Home Affairs correspondent, Afzal Ahmed, looks into the issue.
Shaykh Suliman Ghani is probably most well known as a presenter on many Muslim TV channels and for his support of the release of various detainees abroad. But what has been least known, according to some, is his alleged support for the Islamic State group in Iraq and Syria.
While also retaining its dignity.
This is an accusation which the top individual in British politics, along with others such as the BBC's Andrew Neil, has fired at the Tooting Imam in yesterday's Prime Minister's Question Time. On the back of a question by a fellow Conservative regarding Labour's mayoral candidate sharing a platform with so-called extremists, he told MPs, "If we're going to condemn not just violent extremism, but also the extremism which seeks to justify violence in any way, it's very important that we do not back these people and we do not appear on platforms with them." After immediate shouts from Labour MPs, Cameron carried on saying, "The leader of the Labour Party is saying it's disgraceful. Well, let me tell him, Suliman Ghani, the honourable member for Tooting has appeared on platforms with him 9 times. This man supports IS. Mr. Speaker, they are shouting down this point because they don't want to hear the truth." So what is the truth, and is it as what the Prime Minister alleges? The accused Imam responded straight away on Twitter saying, "PM David Cameron accused me of being an extremist and that I support IS. He did so during Prime Minister's questions in the Commons and therefore cannot be sued." And soon after he added, "I hope the Prime Minister will reflect and retract his comments. This is defamation at its highest level."
And I've been doing it for the last 4 or 5 months.
Labour MPs also criticised the move, with Sadiq Khan issuing a furious response. He said, "The Tories are running a nasty dog-whistling campaign that is designed to divide London's communities. I'm disappointed that the Prime Minister has today joined in." After the session, a Downing Street spokesman defended the PM and spoke of the basis for his attack. He said, "Suliman Ghani on the night of the Paris terror attacks was in Bedford calling for an Islamic State. He said women should be subservient. He shared a platform with him 9 times.
Audience, the same question. Do you believe that you are British?
It's strange that the language changed from Suliman Ghani supporting the self-named Islamic State group to calling for an Islamic State, which the vast majority of Muslims see a distinction to. At the event back in November, which was organised by the news blog site 5 Pillars, at no point did Suliman Ghani show support for the Islamic State group in Iraq and Syria, as the PM alleges, or for the creation of an Islamic State, as the spokesperson said. This observation is also compounded by the fact that in January of this year, Suliman Ghani, along with several other panellists, spoke at an event entitled "The Evils of ISIS." So it seems the attack on Suliman Ghani is nothing more than a smear campaign looking to whip up sentiments of Islamophobia in a hotly contested London mayoral election. Afzal Ahmed, The Report.
Now, before we speak to our guests on this issue, Shaykh Suliman Ghani has declined to come on the programme for legal reasons, but he's issued a statement. He says, on the 18th of April, Andrew Neil on the BBC's London Mayor The Big Debate stated that I was a supporter of the Islamic State. Yesterday, the Prime Minister in Parliament repeated this allegation when he said this man, i.e. me, supports IS. And Mr Ghani says that he's totally opposed to the Islamic State and wishes to put the record straight. His statement goes on to say that he will take legal action against Andrew Neil and the BBC. In relation to David Cameron, he says, in relation to David Cameron saying that in Parliament that I support the IS, I understand that he can do this despite it being untrue and at the same time avoid any legal implications by relying on parliamentary privilege. This matter is now in the hands of my lawyers and I intend to take it forward through them. Well now, joining me to discuss all this is Mohammed Ansar, political and social commentator, who today has written a complaint to the Parliamentary Committee on the issue. And on Skype, the outreach director of Cage UK, Moazzam Begg, who has shared a public platform with Shaykh Suliman Ghani many times. Well, welcome to the programme, both of you. Moazzam, this is a new low, using parliamentary privilege to say things which would land you up in court if you said them outside Parliament?
Absolutely, and I know Shaykh Suliman himself, I spoke to him yesterday,
has actually asked the Prime Minister to come outside of his parliamentary privilege area and to repeat the allegation so that he can seek legal recourse against him. It is a libelous statement to make. I know Shaykh Suliman very well. We've spoken together at an event entitled "The Evils of ISIS," and we both pointed out, amongst other Muslim leaders in the country, why ISIS was such a repugnant organization to us here as Muslims, and why it was important for us to challenge its views, not because the government wants us to, but because we as Muslims recognize its the nature of its divisiveness within the Muslim country community and beyond. Shaykh Suliman, in fact, has been, the irony in all of this is that he's been working closer with conservative Tory candidates in his constituency against Sadiq Khan. And it beggars belief that he could be used as some sort of a stick or a dog whistle, as he calls it, in order to try to trump up the word of extremism, which now clearly the Prime Minister and everybody else who feels like it's okay to use can now call anybody an extremist, anybody an ISIS supporter, and vilify their name and not give them the opportunity to challenge it once it's been put out into the media. How do you ever recover from that? And
of course, I mean, it is made all the more despicable by the fact that the target that David Cameron was aiming at wasn't Suliman Ghani at all. He was trying to smear Sadiq Khan by association, and Suliman Ghani was simply collateral damage for him.
Absolutely, in all of this, people's lives don't matter, and of course, if we would extend that to the war on terror and so forth, that's exactly what it is, just collateral damage. To use a person to hurl him against somebody just because he's a Muslim. It wouldn't happen. Suliman Ghani is not a supporter of Sadiq Khan, but he says that to use me in this way, or to use this extremism label in this way, is completely reprehensible. And I think that the Prime Minister should be held to account. I think the Prime Minister should be made to apologise, because what he said is a blatant lie of which there's absolutely no evidence at all, in addition to the libelous claim that I think Suliman Ghani is now following through against the BBC and Andrew Neil in particular.
Mohammed Ansar, now you're trying to do something about bringing David Cameron to account about this. Just tell us what you've done.
I've written to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, who is responsible for, I'll say the word policing, but I think it's more soft touch than anything else, but they issue and manage the Code of Conduct for Members of Parliament. And I watched, as I do every week, and many people tune into my Twitter feed to see my commentary on Prime Minister's Question Times. I watched the statement being made live, and I found it absolutely shocking. And the problem is this reflects a broader condition we have in society at the minute, which is being created, fermented and peddled by the political right, which is this idea that Muslims somehow are doormats, they're punch bags, they are vilified in broader society, and that they can be the target of false, libelous, unjustifiable smears, false allegations, and somehow that is then being used to marginalise and push people out of public life. So my complaint to the PCS was twofold. One was around statements on the Ahmadiyya community, where I think that the Parliament and the Prime Minister should not be drawn into issues of Islamic theology, and the idea that Muslims are being told by white, non-Muslim Tory parliamentarians what Islam is and isn't, and saying that there is a battle within Islam, that this is somehow a sectarian issue. This was over the terrible and despicable killing of Assad Shah in Glasgow. There were complaints around that when clearly Muslim Council of Britain, scholars and theologians have come out very clearly to stipulate the position of the Ahmadiyya community, juxtapositioned with the Muslim mainstream community and mainstream theology. And the second issue, of course, was around the Suliman Ghani statement in response to Christopher Pincher MP's question. You can read the detail of my complaint to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards on my blog, which is, if you don't mind me just saying, it's moansar.com/blog. You can go there, read the complaint for yourselves. I know it's been doing the rounds online and in journalistic circles, but I think the idea to be able to, although it is correct to say that there is a veil of privilege, parliamentary privilege, behind which parliamentarians and the Prime Minister can hide. However, there is a code of conduct. And I think the code of conduct covers things like the duties of members, their general principles around selflessness, integrity, objectivity, openness, but most of all, honesty. And if the Prime Minister has come forward to the front benches at the dispatch box and misled Parliament, and I will be stronger and I will say knowingly lied about this issue when Sadiq Khan and Suliman Ghani have been absolutely unequivocal about saying there is no support for IS, there is very little or no extremism that anybody can point a finger at. I think this is scurrilous and brings the House into disrepute.
Moazzam Begg, it's pretty extraordinary when Dennis Skinner can get thrown out of the House for using the word dodgy about the Prime Minister, but the whole-scale trashing of an individual's reputation who doesn't have the kind of privilege that other MPs have to answer back escapes with no comment.
Well, I think it's probably the Prime Minister now has proved in a different way that he really is dodgy, Dave, because if anything that he'd said had weight in relation to this, and that the way that he tried to attack Suliman Ghani and used his name against Sadiq Khan, it was evident that he could say that this man is a supporter of IS without any thought of the weight of what it is that he's saying. He's saying that this person is a supporter of Islamic State, therefore is liable to get arrested for terrorism in this country. That's how serious that statement is. And we wouldn't be surprised if somebody from the police has picked this up and then tried to use the Prime Minister's statements as evidence. But the truth is that the opposite side of the House recognised it, and they called out David Cameron for what he was yesterday, and that is a racist, an Islamophobe who simply has fed into the lies that's been quoted and repeated and retweeted by various sections of the neocon media and beyond, that this is something you can get away with because the atmosphere is right. And people, when they come along and challenge this, is what they don't like. Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith can have it at each other, can be at one another's throats if they want to politically. But to bring in innocent bystanders and to malign them right in between is, I think, as Mohammmed Ansar said, the height of being disreputable.
Mohammed Ansar, I mean, if there was any good point in the Commons when all this was going on, it was the point where Labour MPs started shouting at the Prime Minister that he was a racist. I mean, I can't remember anything like that happening in the Commons ever. You'd have to go back to the 1960s when Harold Wilson described a Tory MP as a parliamentary leper for running a racist by-election campaign. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary scenes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we have commentators like Peter Oborne, who wrote earlier today about how this is effectively a new low in British politics, and the fact that he is a Tory, and he has been so horrified by the Islamophobia and the racism, he reflects back on the Smethwick campaign in 1964 in the general election, where Peter Griffiths stood, I think, as a Tory candidate against who was the shadow foreign secretary at the time, Patrick Gordon Walker. And Griffiths used a campaign to make a statement about immigration. He said, if you want to use, and I won't say the N-word, for a neighbour, vote Labour. And that was a Tory slogan. And I think, the fact that you've got a Tory commentator, a recognised, as a centre-right commentator saying he cannot support, under any circumstances, Zach Goldsmith's campaign and will be supporting Sadiq Khan. I think this says something. But I think I was in a community meeting earlier today, and I think when the question is raised, is this just a brouhaha? Isn't this just parliamentary Trumpism where people are just throwing around silly comments and phrases? I think we have to be very clear on this, because I'm a chief executive and I run an organisation in the South, and I was at a community meeting with police officers earlier and a member of the community who had been maligned by her former husband, who had been labelling her as an extremist as part of this sort of, to disrupt her family life, to try and get custody of a child. So our Prime Minister, our political classes and our political leaders, they do set the tone, they do set the tenor, and they do create the climate for these kind of discussions in broader society. So these things aren't just isolated in the House of Commons chamber. They reflect on broader society, and they're ruining the lives of Muslims. OK. Mohammed Ansar and Moazzam Begg, thank you very much for joining us for that discussion. But I'm afraid that's the end.